How's it going, everyone? So Packers OTAs start next week, next Monday to be exact, run all the way through June 8th. So in today's video, I wanted to give my prediction of my way too early Packers 53-man roster. So of course, we have OTAs, we have training camp, and we have preseason, and a lot will change from now till then. But I still want to get out my initial prediction of what the 53-man roster will look like, so then I can look back on it and see what I got right and see what I got wrong. So this is going into the offseason, not really seeing much of any player. Obviously, we had the rookie minicamp, so we saw a little bit there, but the true talent evaluation and roster evaluation happens with OTAs and then primarily with training camp and then going into preseason. So I'll also make one before training camp, after training camp, and then, of course, before the exact cut down day to the 53-man roster. Also, guys, everything Packers right here on the channel if you are a new viewer. Once OTAs start next week, I'll be putting out a bunch of content on that, and then, of course, throughout the entire offseason, there'll be content pretty much every single day about the Green Bay Packers. So if that does interest you and you are a Packers fan, go down, click the subscribe button, and leave a like on the video. This year is going to be very interesting because I feel like it's one of the youngest rosters the Packers have ever had, and there's going to be a lot of talent evaluation. This team is going to look completely different from what we saw the last, 2 to 3 years with Aaron Rodgers and company and all the veterans he had around here. There's a lot of players on this roster that are young. I believe the oldest player is 32 years old. Yeah, it's Pat O'Donnell at 32 years old. Kenny Clark is the player with the fourth most experience on this team, and that's just crazy to think right now. So yeah, this roster is really young, so this is going to be kind of hard to predict because, like I said, it's so different from years past. We kind of had our main, group of guys and then kind of some roster fringe guys that you kind of had to guess on, but the main group was kind of always static, where this year, it is completely different. Let's get into the prediction. So first and foremost, it's going to be color-coded. If a player is highlighted in blue, they are a rookie. If they're highlighted in orange, they're an undrafted free agent. And if they're highlighted in red, they're a street free agent. Now, that's only for this year. So you have players like Josh Nijman, Caleb Jones, who, are undrafted free agents. They're not going to be listed in orange. That's only if they're an undrafted free agent this year or a street free agent this year or a rookie this year. All right, so let's get it started on offense, and we'll obviously start at the top at the quarterback position, and I have the Packers keeping 2 quarterbacks. I think this much is pretty obvious considering they drafted Sean Clifford in the 5th round with Jordan Love and Sean Clifford. Yeah, they could go into this keeping 3 and keeping Danny Etling. They've had him around for a long time, but I feel like he will just still be their practice squad quarterback, and the Packers will go into the season with 2 quarterbacks and use that extra position elsewhere to help benefit the team. So we have Jordan Love, obviously, going into his first year as a full-time starter. Super, super excited for that. Then we have Sean Clifford, a pick a lot of people weren't too fond of. I don't necessarily hate Sean Clifford. I think he's a bad, quarterback. I just think it was very early to select someone like Sean Clifford there in that 5th round, and I think you could have drafted him in the 7th or even had him as an undrafted free agent. But he has a lot of experience over at Penn State, playing 5 seasons there. He has leadership ability, and he's also an athletic quarterback. I think he'll be a good backup. If the Packers have to go down to Sean Clifford in their first year, if Jordan Love gets hurt, I mean, they're not going to be a good football team anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Then we're moving on to the running back. I have them keeping 3 here. Now, I was very tempted to keep 4, but I have the Packers keeping 3, and that is obviously Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Then it really comes to a toss-up for that 3rd spot. Lou Nichols, their 7th-round draft selection out of Central Michigan. They have Tyler Goodson, an undrafted free agent last year out of Iowa. And they also have Patrick Taylor, a 3rd-year undrafted free agent out of Memphis, who has had the most snaps out of all the guys available at number 3. But I feel like the Packers spending a 7th-round pick on a running back kind of gives you that hint that, okay, they're going to want to keep this guy. Yeah, he could slip through the cracks and end up on the practice squad, but a lot of people had Lou Nichols valued pretty highly due to his versatility as a running back and as a receiver. And I wasn't too fond of the pick just because I'm really high on Tyler Goodson. But I did a little bit of research, and, Lou Nichols is definitely growing on me, and I feel like that is going to be their choice at the 3rd running back spot. Now, I wouldn't be mad if it was Tyler Goodson. I think he kind of offers a similar thing where he's a really good receiver. He's a decent runner. We saw him with a few flashes in last preseason. So this is just like the early pre-OTA, pre-training camp. So considering they spent a 7th-round pick on him, that's why I'm keeping him here in my prediction. But obviously, so much can change. Tyler Goodson or Patrick Taylor could come out in these OTAs and training camps and blow up and really steal that 3rd spot. Honestly, this is kind of a toss-up for me. This is one that's really hard to predict because, they have the experience with Patrick Taylor, and they have the upside with Tyler Goodson, and the draft pick and Lou Nichols all have their own case. But I'm going with Lou Nichols just because he is a draft pick and the other 2 are not. Moving on to the tight end position, I have them keeping 4 tight ends. They really revamped this tight end room in this draft, and I'm super happy that the Packers did that. This is an extremely talented draft class for the tight end position, and the Packers went right out and attacked it, drafting one in the second round with Luke Musgrave, and right back after that in the third round with Tucker Kraft. So I have Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft obviously making the team. I think they're the first and second string tight ends. Musgrave more of that move, can split out into the slot, can split out wide, deep threat type of tight end, and Tucker Kraft will be more of your inline guy, but also a nice receiving threat, but a really nice run blocker, pass blocker. I love that duo, that combination of speed and power, and Tucker Kraft isn't slow himself either. Then I have Josiah DeGuara, that H-back role. The Packers are probably still going to use him in that H-back role, but he could play some tight end, some inline, whatever you need him to be, but he's not going to take any snaps at tight end over Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave, in my opinion, but he will get snaps for the certain packages the Packers like with him at H-back. Then we have Tyler Davis at number 4, and I know a lot of people do not like Tyler Davis, and I agree with him not being on offense, right? So if Tyler Davis doesn't step foot on offense, I'm completely okay with it. But the fact is, he's actually a pretty solid special teamer. He was one of our better special teams players last year, so I'm keeping him on the roster for that sole fact. The Packers have to keep investing in special teams. They finally started to rebuild that thing with Rich Basaraski and adding, street free agents that are core special teamers and really bringing in guys that can help that special teams unit. And Tyler Davis was one of them, so that's why I'm keeping him on here. I don't think you'll need to get him on offense, and if you have an injury to Musgrave, Kraft, or DeGuara, you could simply sign another street free agent or bring someone else up that was on your practice squad from the offseason. So I have Musgrave, Kraft, DeGuara, and Davis at tight end with 4. Moving on to wide receiver, this one was actually another hard one for me in the fact that I didn't know if I wanted to keep 6 or 7 wide receivers, and I honestly think the Packers might go 7 this year to just load that room up with as much potential and talent as possible, also giving you more options on the special team. So obviously Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jayden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and I'd even say Samori Toure are roster locks. Now, a lot of people might go, Samori Toure is definitely not a roster lock, but I feel like Matt LaFleur in the Packers front office talks about him a lot. So I'm keeping him on this roster, first off, because I really like him, and second off, I think he has a lot of potential in a very young, unproven room and could definitely start to see more snaps than he saw last year. And even as a 7th round pick, he saw a decent amount of snaps last year. So Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, they're your number 1, number 2 wide receivers. Jayden Reed in that 2nd round, really love him. Going to be doing a video on him very, very shortly. I think he's their slot receiver. He can play inside. He can play outside, though. He has versatility. He could be your motion man. Dontavian Wicks is going to be a very solid depth outside wide receiver. He might even sometimes get snaps over Romeo Doubs. I think they're going to have a nice rotation there. I love Dontavian Wicks as well. He screamed Packers wide receiver throughout the entire draft process, and I had him mocked to the Packers multiple times. Already talked about Samori Toure. He could definitely get some snaps in the slot. Just in general, I think he could be used in a multitude of different ways. He could also potentially be a punt returner. I think Jayden Reed's going to be our day 1 punt returner. He showed a lot of explosion in that role at Michigan State, but Samori Toure definitely could do it as well. Then we have Grant DeBose, the 7th round rookie here. I think this guy offers a lot of potential. Not going to see a ton of snaps. Year 1 might likely be, inactive for a lot of the games, but if an injury happens or his number gets called, I think this guy could really step up. I think he has a lot of talent for that 7th round selection. Very similar to Samori Toure last year. Not the type of players they are, but similar in regards to the type of talent they have, and I feel like they were great value in this 7th round. And I finally included Bo Melton. I know a lot of people are high on Bo Melton, a very speedy returner, offers you kick return, punt return, special teams ability, and also in the slot. Melton ran a 4.34 40. Dude is a burner. He was drafted in the 7th round of last year's draft for the Seattle Seahawks, then put on their practice squad. Then the Packers signed him off the Seattle Seahawks practice squad, and I thought he was great value in the 7th round in last year's draft. I kind of saw him as potentially a late 5th round to 6th round wide receiver, and I think he offers, a lot of speed at wide receiver and also, like I said, on special teams. So that's why I kept 7 here, just because he could be your punt returner. If you don't want Jayden Reed to do that, or Jayden Reed gets hurt, something of that sort, he can offer you value on as a gunner for a special teams unit, and on offense if you want to use him as a jet sweep guy, a deep threat type of guy out of the slot. Bo Melton can do that. So it was hard for me to keep 7 because I normally don't do this, but I feel like in this year, moving on to Jordan Love as a first-year starter, you want to surround him with as much talent as possible. So that's why I kept 7 there. Moving on to tackle, I separated this into tackle, guard, center, rather than just in general offensive line. So tackle, we have David Bakhtiari, Yosh Nijman, Rasheed Walker, and Caleb Jones. We saw Caleb Jones last year, kind of similar to the Yosh Nijman from a few years ago, undrafted free agent, massive human being, and did really well in training camp, but ended up not making the roster, was thrown on the practice squad. I think this year he makes the roster, he takes that next step, and I think Rasheed Walker does the same thing. I think they have a solid group of tackles there with Bakhtiari, Nijman, Rasheed Walker, and Caleb Jones, and of course they have versatility with other guys that can play tackle with as well. Moving on to guard, we have Elton Jenkins, John Runyon Jr., Royce Newman, and Sean Ryan. Elton Jenkins, John Runyon Jr., roster locks, obviously. Royce Newman, I feel like, could be a roster lock. He offers versatility, and I think he's a great depth piece. You don't want him starting out there, and he shouldn't have to. Sean Ryan, man, what a disappointment last year. Didn't get any snaps on offense, was suspended the last 6 games. Dude was taking PEDs and still didn't play on offense. It's pretty wild. I don't think his career's over by any means. I think it's really, really early still. It's another Packers 3rd round pick, and we saw Amari Rodgers get cut as soon as, under 2 years after being drafted. So if he doesn't put it together this year and doesn't show out in OTAs, training camp, and just does absolutely nothing again, and other players are started over him in situations, and yeah, this could be his last year, sadly. But I did love that pick, in the 3rd round last year, coming out of UCLA. I think he's a nice guard, so I'm hoping he can turn it around. So I have him making the roster here in 2023. Then moving to center, I have Zach Tom listed there because honestly, I think Zach Tom could steal a job from Josh Myers. I think you got to have your best 5 out there, and Zach Tom is 100% one of them. So I have Zach Tom and Josh Myers. Those 2 are obvious. That finishes and rounds out the offensive line with 10 total guys. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, we have defensive line. I have them keeping 5 here, and these 5 are very obvious to me. Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton, very obvious there. Those guys are making the roster, and as well as the next 2 guys, the 2 rookies, Colby Wooden in the 4th round and Carl Brooks in the 6th round. Guys that offer versatility. Colby Wooden, more of that, lighter outside type of defensive lineman, where Carl Brooks, you can slide him inside as a zero tech or whatever you need him as. Bigger dude, ton of production at Bowling Green. I love their group going into the season. I love the 2 draft picks with Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks. Like I said, I think they offer a ton of versatility, and I'm super excited for the year 2 of Devontae Wyatt and the continuance of emergence of TJ Slayton. Moving on to the edge room, I have 5. Now, I don't have Rashawn Gary here. I'll go over this later. Obviously, I think he's starting on IR, so he doesn't count towards the 53-man roster. So I have Preston Smith, Kingsley Enagbare, Lucas Van Ness, Justin Hollins, and Brenton Cox Jr. Brenton Cox Jr. being the only undrafted free agent I have making the roster this year. Usually the Packers have one of those guys, and if it is going to be a guy, it's going to be Brenton Cox Jr. Yeah, has some character concerns, but I think he understands this is his chance to make it in the NFL, and a Packers team that could use edge depth going into the season with Rashawn Gary entering on IR most likely. Brenton Cox has the ability, has the talent, so I think he could definitely make this roster. Preston Smith and Enagbare, 2 guys that I think are going to be day 1 starters. Enagbare, great draft pick last year in the 5th round. I think he was a steal. Lucas Van Ness, of course, our first overall pick at number 13. I don't think he starts day 1, but I think he could very well become a starter very, very soon thereafter, and will be a nice rotational guy early on. Then Justin Hollins, they re-signed him this offseason, showing me that they want to keep him around. I thought he was a great depth piece late last season, so I kept Justin Hollins on this roster. Moving to inside linebacker, we have 4. We have Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, and Eric Wilson. The first 2 are your obvious starters with Devondre Campbell and Quay Walker. Super excited for Quay Walker's year 2. Isaiah McDuffie, I feel like, took the step up last year, and that's why they were okay with getting rid of Chris Barnes or not retaining him. And I think Isaiah McDuffie will get some snaps in this defense this year, a decent amount, and will be a rotational guy at inside linebacker. Then for the 4th guy, I have Eric Wilson, one of the best special teamers in the NFL last year, and for the Green Bay Packers, of course, and they re-signed him. So I think there's no doubt in my mind they keep Eric Wilson on this team, and they very well could have 5 inside linebackers instead of 7 wide receivers and 4 inside linebackers. Moving on to the cornerback spot, another player that I see starting on the PUP or IR, it's going to be PUP in my opinion, is Eric Stokes. So he's not going to include in the 53-man roster. So we have Jair Alexander, Rasul Douglas, Keyshawn Nixon, Shamar Jean-Charles, and Carrington Valentine, their 7th round selection out of Kentucky. Jair Alexander, Rasul Douglas are going to start day 1 at outside corners. I think Keyshawn Nixon's going to be your slot guy. He's going to get a lot of opportunity early. Shamar Jean-Charles kind of been a little bit of a disappointment. Hasn't gotten many defensive snaps, but hasn't really shown out when he gets the chance either. He's kind of your backup slot slot guy there. I think he was a 5th round selection a couple years ago. Then we have Carrington Valentine, that 7th round selection this year. I think this guy offers, outside ability at cornerback, and then also is going to give you some value at special teams. Moving on to safety, I have them keeping 5, so 10 total defensive backs. And at safety, we have Rudy Ford, Darnell Savage, Tarvarius Moore, Jonathan Owens, and Anthony Johnson Jr. Rudy Ford and Darnell Savage are likely your day 1 starters at safety, but I think they might use Darnell Savage in a multitude of ways. And, when they use him correctly, I think he's a decent player. They also signed street free agents Tarvarius Moore, who was formerly with the 49ers, and Jonathan Owens most recently. They just signed this week, I think, was most recently with the Texans. Had a lot of snaps last year. Tarvarius Moore and John Owens, 2 veterans that have a lot of experience. So I feel like they're definitely going to want to keep those guys in the room, and one of those guys could definitely end up starting at safety very, very soon. Then I kept rookie Anthony Johnson Jr. They got in the 7th round. I think he offers a lot of potential, and a lot of people had him as like a 5th round safety. So I think there's no doubt in my mind he makes this roster, and he very well could be a starting safety when it's all said and done, middle of the year to the end of the year. There's a big question mark at the safety group, and we really don't know how it's going to look like going into the season, but I think these 5, in my opinion, will be the ones to make it. Then quickly to run through special teams, I think Anders Carlson makes it simply because he's a draft pick, a 6th round draft pick. Yet Parker White could steal that job, or they could bring in another kicker and they could steal that job. But just because he's a draft pick and we haven't gone through any of OTAs or training camp yet, and we haven't seen any kicker yet, I'm just, my best guess, if I'm a betting man, is going to be Anders Carlson at kicker. I have Pat O'Donnell at punter. I thought he had a solid year last year. He's on the last year of his contract. They could end up cutting him to save some money and bring in another guy. I saw they signed a punter yesterday, but I still have Pat O'Donnell making this 53-man roster. Then at long snapper, I have Matt Orzech, a street free agent formerly with the Rams. Considering they brought this guy in off the street, I think they wanted to prioritize long snapper because it's been a problem in recent years, and I think he's the guy to finally kind of fix that position. So obviously we just have 3 special teams players there with kicker, punter, and long snapper. Moving on to what I said earlier, the IR/PUP, I have 2 players. We have Rashawn Gary and Eric Stokes. So Rashawn Gary likely will be back around week 8, right after our bye week. Eric Stokes, who knows? Yesterday they said Eric Stokes isn't going to be ready for OTAs. Who knows if he's going to be ready for even minicamp? I feel like, he had a very significant injury. We never really got, an exact explanation of what that was, but I do believe he could start this year on the PUP. So that's what I have it as here. And I think at cornerback, Rasul Douglas, Shai Alexander, and Keyshawn Nixon lock it down until Eric Stokes comes back, and then they can kind of rotate him in. So yeah, that does it for my initial, way too early Green Bay Packers 53-man roster prediction. Let me know down in the comments below if there's any players on here that I missed out on that you think are gonna 100% make the 53-man roster. Who are your sleepers to make the roster? Leave that down in the comments below. I appreciate everyone watching. Like I said, if you could leave a like on the video, it supports my channel a ton. But I'll catch you on the next one, and as always, go back.